And I am Mark Bunyan. I have taken my glasses off. It's like Woody Allen without his glasses on. Nobody will recognise me.
Well, as Mark's just said, this is Mark Bunyan. He's talking to me. He's taking his glasses off because I have a thing about glare. First, I must ask you, Bunyan, is that your real name?
Yes. Yes. As far as I know, I've only ever looked it up once. And when the internet first became an available thing, about 20 years ago, and I realised you could do genealogy, I did look into John Bunyan, because as a child, coming out of church, congregational, all these little old ladies would come up, and it really was always little old ladies, with copies of the Pilgrim's Progress and say, a man with a famous name wrote a book. Here, you couldn't move in our house for copies of the Pilgrim's Progress. And I did get excited when I looked at it and discovered it's sort of a play. And I did glove puppets, but you've only got two hands, so I'd always put them on bottles, and poor relatives would have to sit while I read out chunks and moved. Sooty and Muffin the Mule playing Christian and Mr. Doubtful as you would be.
Because it's a great name for someone who does comedy.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it up.
Yeah. Yes. No, it was. He also had no direct relations, so no, I'm not related to John. Well, probably some.
But it is your real name.
It is my real name.
You were born in Bristol.
I was literally born in Bristol, yes, and then moved to, I was taken days later, or within the week, whatever, to North Somerset, Clevedon. And then we moved to somewhere called Backwell, astonishingly well named, and finally ended up in Nailsea, which was a village and is now a sort of small city dormitory town to Bristol.
But you visited London around the age of 4 to see your grandparents.
And realised there'd been a terrible mistake. Does it say that on my website?
Geographical. Funnily enough, it does. So really, you should be a Londoner.
Well, I just always, and I think I said to my parents straight away, this is where I'm going to come to live. And I just spent the next 18 years trying to, and there was never any question that I would live in London.
So did you make lots of trips to London in those 18 years?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. My grandparents moved down to Sussex, so there wasn't. And one of my mother's 9 siblings lived in Lewisham, and she and her husband would come down and tell glamorous stories of this. And I just remember they're saying, "Oh, we never go up to the smoke. This is where we live. We don't actually go to London."
But you didn't go to university in London. You went to university in St Andrews in Scotland. How did you end up at St Andrews?
St Andrews was. I wanted to do music and drama. In fact, I wanted to do drama, but my parents said they wouldn't support me at all if I did just drama. They deny it now. And so I applied to do music and drama at Hull. For reasons I'm not really sure, I wasn't. My A-level music was not good, but I didn't do O-level. It was sort of for bizarre reasons. I went to a brand new state grammar school. I think they were finding their way, and sometimes they put their feet in the wrong place. I know I'm not a natural musician. I don't have good musical IQ. But on the other hand,
before I get back to music,
so I didn't get into Hull. And instead I was offered this place at St Andrews, which I'd never heard of, for some bizarre reason, and I wasn't keeping a diary then, so I have no idea why there would have been a barbecue in the evening at Nailsea School in September 1967. But there was, and the headmaster's wife, who was the only really inspiring teacher I remember from school. I remember, what's the opposite of inspiring? Despairing.
Yes.
But I mean, the music teacher was always very encouraging, or at least.
So is that how you first got into music?
My mother decided that as I clearly had no interest in sports, I ought to have an interest in something, and because I kept saying I wanted to be an actor, she decided that I should have piano lessons from the age of 7, which I did, and And like most people, I had the lesson where I said, I'm never going to do this again. And was persuaded to go back, and I'm so glad. And I meet people all the time who say, oh, I did it until I was 10, and then I had a lesson, and I said, I'm never going to go back. And I wish my parents had made me do it.
What did you study at university?
So I went up to do, it was English. And I think I can say that at that point, most of, or at least a third of the English class had got in there on the clearing scheme, because the English department did not have a particularly good reputation. Now, of course, it is one of the finest in the country. So it's quite good to be able to say, I've got an honours degree in English from St Andrews rather than a second from a Scottish university.
Even though you studied English there, you were involved in the review there, and you also wrote plays, didn't you?
I did. I wrote a play, a one-person play, which the woman who directed it is still a friend, and I've got another friend who came up to St Andrews about 2 years later and saw it, and she still talks about it. It's sort of quite impressive. And I had quite a few friends, mainly women, I think, who said that they actually cried.
Really?
At the end of it. It was about a man who was so lonely he sort of invites an imaginary friend in, and then sort of you realise that he's done this a lot and he's trying to stop doing it.
Didn't you write something in French?
No. I directed La Machine Infernale. There was a French club, and I was in Giraudoux Intermezzo in French. And I then said I would direct La Machine Infernale by Cocteau, which I loved. And only years later did I finally discover that, in fact, he did base Jocasta vaguely on Isadora Duncan, because Jocasta spends the whole time throwing the scarf, and of course, eventually.
But it was at St Andrews that you also met your partner, Andrew.
We were there at the same time. He was there. He did the most brilliant thing. He did 2 years of an American degree. Came over and did an exchange year at St Andrews, won the history prize. He's fairly dazzling academic, I think. And then went back to America and said, look, I've got this year from St Andrews, can I put it against my American degree? And they said, well, okay. And so he did one more year there, and then came back to St Andrews and said, look, I've done can I put this, I've got this American degree, can I put that against this year? And we were in, I must have met him in, I think, October 1967, but he was, I didn't really, he wasn't there for my second year. I don't have any particular memories of him. He was always sort of on the other side of groups of friends.
But you've been together.
And he had the most ghastly late 60s mutton chop sideboards.
But you've been together ever since, despite those sideboards.
No. He because I was sort of desperately in the closet.
Oh, really? So you weren't together?
No. I couldn't believe that this awful thing had happened to me, and I had no sexual experience. I was as lonely as any person on the planet can be, I think, in terms of having this terrible, terrible secret inside me that I couldn't talk about. And I finally had a sort of minor, very flimsy attempt at suicide about January 1969, second year blues, as they put it. And went to, I saw the university psychiatrist, and he sent me to, I had an appointment with a clinical psychologist, and he was the person in this institution somewhere outside St Andrews, a big sort of stone building with the wind howling and other people howling probably. And I finally said, I'm homosexual. The words came out of my mouth, and I cried and cried and cried and cried, and then decided it was what was really weird was he said, so what kind of men do you find attractive? Tall men, muscular men. I think he probably had something he wanted to get up his chest. And he was sort of actually young and rather good looking when I think about it, as I remember it. And I said, please, you mustn't tell anybody, because I know it's completely confidential. So I go back to see the university psychiatrist a week later, who says, oh, Dr. Dalton, that may not have been his name, but let's say it was, tells me you've been experiencing certain homosexual tendencies. Do you not find women at all attractive? Do you not like to run your fingers through their flaxen hair, or caress their swan-like necks, or fondle their pert buttocks and bosoms? Thank God I went. I mean, he obviously had to get something off his chest. And eventually he gave me some advice, which was, why don't you get married and think about it later? And, I quote, never forget, Oscar Wilde was a happily married man with 2 kids, you know.
So after all that, he wanted you to conform and pretty much stay in the closet. But Andrew, so when did you and Andrew get together?
Eventually, I mean, I sort of stayed totally in the closet at St Andrews. And then eventually I moved to London, and I told a couple of people in sort of awful sort of Tennessee Williams confession scenes. And I moved to London, and I shared a flat with a friend who's still a great friend, who I think a while after I came out, he came out, and he's been with his partner, I think now for 40 years. So, and I just decided I was going to tell everybody. I just couldn't stand this secret anymore. I'd had a couple of nights of going on my own. I went into London, and I knew that the Salisbury was a gay pub, so I thought I'd go to this gay pub. And I walked up and down outside for ages, and eventually flung the door open, and there were all these straight couples eating veal ham and egg pie sauce salads, and it was, it wasn't the right bit of the bar, and I hightailed back to Greenwich, but I was sort of I was telling people, and I mean Zoe Fairbairns, who's always been an incredibly supportive friend, who was very active in the women's movement and edited Spare Rib for a while. I mean, we went out for lunch once, and she bought me a copy of Gay News, and I went back to the office, and I told them all, and there was an official tea break in the middle of the afternoon, and I got out my copy of Gay News and started reading, and one of the girls burst into tears. She said, "Oh, I know you said that, but seeing you with that, I mean, it's really awful. That's sad and stuff." But I just.
But getting back to Andrew.
Yeah, well, with Andrew. Another friend was, he now denies it, but the story I got from Andrew was that this friend had turned up in Edinburgh and said, oh, Bunyan, where Andrew was doing his PhD by this point, and said, oh, Bunyan's done practically everything bar taken out in the Times to tell people he's queer. And Andrew was on almost the first train down, having sort of fancied me absolutely rotten, apparently.
So he hadn't, obviously, in the closet, and he hadn't picked it up.
Well, yes, actually, I say that apparently I was very, very drunk the night before I graduated, and apparently he snogged me, but I don't remember.
So you've been together ever since then, since you came down. What's the secret to your relationship? It's lasted. Because you are very different characters. Obviously, people can't see Andrew. We are very different people.
I mean, and we have had our own lives, but I do feel incredibly lucky. He's always been amazingly supportive of me. I mean, he has been the one who's had a much more financially successful career. But he always totally believed in what I was doing, and in many ways what I was doing was his fault. So it was sort of quite good, because within 10 days of us getting together, he was the secretary of the Edinburgh University Gay Soc, and he persuaded me, or he just asked me to come to the first, I think for probably the first and only International Gay Rights Congress in 1974. December in Edinburgh, which was a crash course. I met all sorts of amazing people like Jackie Forster, and I met Michael Mason. I remember Dennis Lemon
of Gay News.
Dennis was really tall, and he sort of strode around, looking like a bit like sort of 1920s film director actually, and I don't remember him engaging with anybody. Presumably he engaged with people he wanted to. Whereas Zoe Fairbairns had been to a Sappho meeting, and she talked to me about it. They'd asked her to come and speak, and I saw Jackie Forster, and you know, I mean, sort of like, I don't know, the Chocolate Bunny or Tigger or something. I sort of just bounced up and said, "Hello, I've never met a lesbian before." She said, "Oh, darling, I mean, Jackie is just absolutely fabulous."
What does Andrew make of your comedy?
There are things. The current thing, the productive test monologue. He actually held the video camera, or he was behind the camera when I was doing it, and he kept laughing, which is really good. There have been points. There were some lines in some of the Down in the Village monologues that I wrote over a 15 or so period, 20 year period. It used to be if Andrew really laughed at something, cut it. It would just fall like sort of absolutely dead. I'll always remember You, Sweetheart, my song about the First World War, which has been very successful and 30 years on. Still,
a beautiful song.
Thank you. Moves people to tears. You know, he said it's terribly sentimental. I wouldn't.
He doesn't do sentimentality.
No. Curiously enough, one of the first times I sang that song, I was performing in San Francisco and nobody was coming, and there were 2 people turned up at this bar where I was playing, and one of them was a friend of ours from London who was in his early 80s, who was a fabulous man. I met him through the Stretton CHE group. And George, if a relative died and left him money, he would just go off anywhere and see the world. And he saw my name in a gay newspaper, so he'd come along to see this thing. And then there was a woman who'd heard me I was interviewed on KPFA, which was a gay radio station, which is, you know, was quite an extraordinary thing. The idea of a gay radio station channel in America, it was broadcast out of Berkeley. I was interviewed by a man who I knew and for a while knew as Fred Brungard, but the world knows him as Mother Missionary Position, as one of the founding mothers of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. This interview, they interviewed me, and there just weren't that many people, you know, who were out and singing songs that people might want to listen to more than the one time they had to. And for about 2 years afterwards, people would say, "Oh, I was in San Francisco, and there was an interview with you on the radio." Apparently, they used to, you know, if they had an hour slot, and if they just whopped me on again. And I said, "I've got this song about First World War, and I'm not sure about it." And I sang it, and I got to the end, and I love it. I mean, you listen to the tape, and there is a pause, and then there's just.
Right.
But I sang that. I said to these 2 people who turned out, I said, "Well, it's a bit daft." And then the woman said, "Well, she said, I've driven, you know, she said, it's a shame because I've driven 30 miles to get it." "You've driven 30 miles to get it? Well, of course I'll do a show." And I said to them, "You know, buy me a drink at the end. Don't applaud, because 2 people applauding sounds silly." And I had a signal with a lighting man that if I did think that the audience was right to do "I'll Always Remember You, Sweetheart," I would do. And I think I only did it once or twice in that whole thing. But I got to the end, and George, who, as I said, was about 82, they didn't applaud. And I went into the next number. I was about halfway through the next number, and I just saw George ever so gently do that. And he came up to me afterwards and said, "The World War song was just incredible." He said, "How did you know about that?" He said, I did that twice in the Second World War." Which, I think that sort of validated the song completely and utterly for me. Also, the other time I remember singing it in 1981. The Gay Pride March was moved to Huddersfield. I think it was. I can never remember which year it is. I have this boring sense of chronology. I can always remember everything, but for one reason I can't. Check this. I think it was 1981 that Gay Pride March was moved to Huddersfield because there were lots of police raids happening on the gay club, and it was just absolute harassment. And it was decided by the people who organised the Pride March that we would go to that, and everybody went to Huddersfield. It was very heavy. I think there were probably only between 300 and 600 of us. It was the first time I realised how difficult gay black people have it, because there were black people absolutely incandescent with rage at seeing a black person then, in the march, and I sort of wanted to go hold him. And we got to the end, and I was doing an hour's cabaret following. There were three of us. There was two sort of groups of people, I think, and I started. And I started singing "I'll Always Remember Sweetheart," and with a song like that, you remember why you wrote it, but you can't bring that into the performance every time. You can't, because it's about painful memory, and so it becomes a performance, and I can do that performance well, and people accept I'm doing the performance. I've sung it at a funeral once, and I didn't go to the funeral. I just stood at the side to come out and perform my song, because I knew the person whose funeral it was, and I knew I wouldn't be able to do it if I thought remotely about what else I was doing. But what was peculiar was we got to the end of the march, and the organisers said, go back to the hall where this is going to be happening, go in groups of 2 or 3, don't go on your own. It was really very unpleasant, and so it was a very wound up audience. And I got into the second verse, which is where the two soldiers are saying, or the guy's saying goodbye to his soldier lover, and can't show any emotion at all. And I suddenly realised that the whole audience was very, very moved and tense about it. And I realised what I was singing, and it went backwards and forwards. And I had difficulty not crying. It's the only time I've ever sung a song not, and it was an astounding thing.
It's a very poignant song. You're probably best known for your satirical songs, your comedy. In 1972, you were living in London. By 1975, you joined Icebreakers, and it was Icebreakers which helped inspire your niche in satirical songwriting, because you wrote a song for their 4th birthday.
Yeah.
But Icebreakers, what was Icebreakers?
Icebreakers was a self-help telephone line that came out of the Gay Liberation Front's counter-psychiatry group. And I wasn't actually in the counter-psychiatry group. It had finished by then, but as you can imagine, I would have been in a counter-psychiatry group, given the advice I had been given by that particular psychiatrist. And we had a squat in Railton Road, Brixton, with a telephone line, and it was personed between, it was either 7 till 10 or 7:30 to 10:30, and usually it was just sort of one person on their own, and you talked, you just answered the phone, and I always knew, I could have been the person on the other end of the line. And I wrote a piece recently about my own gay history, and as a result of what happened in Orlando, and I was trying to cut it down to sort of quick and poignant, pertinent lines. And I realised that by the end of the 2.5 years I was in Icebreakers, I could actually tell people they weren't alone with a great deal more confidence.
What do you remember about their tea parties and its founder, Roger Baker?
Roger Baker wasn't at the party when I first sang my song, and I always take it as a huge compliment that I said I'm writing a song, and he said, oh yeah, what, like sort of 2 lines about everybody and 2 lines to finish it. And at the party, I sang it. I think eventually people asked me to sing it again, sort of later in the evening. It was Dorian Arroyo's house, I think, and there was a fabulous grand piano. And I just sort of realised that nobody was writing. It was a couple of years ago. It was a couple of years later. It was the first sort of gay song I wrote. I'd written sort of in house fun songs about the things that happened in the house I lived in, just for the fun of it. And I was invited to perform at the first London Gay Arts Festival at the Oval House in 1979, March 79, and my first gig was really difficult, but I won people over. I think people didn't know what they wanted, and and there was a lot of anger, a lot of sort of justifiable anger, and I think I showed people that you can be a camp gay man at the piano and have powerful things to say. And the Icebreakers song in particular, which is, you can see it on YouTube. It's not a particularly good performance, or video.
But when you did that song, you realised you found a niche that other people weren't really doing.
And that was the thing, that was what was important to me. It was to make everyone realise that we did only have the requisite numbers of arms and legs and stuff. And that we weren't necessarily Larry Grayson, and we weren't to be laughed at, and we weren't sad, and we weren't going to die in the last reel.
And you went on to perform gigs for the Gay News Fighting Fund, didn't you?
That was through a friend who was in Streatham CHE, John Craig, who now lives in Sheffield. Moved up to Sheffield a while ago, and a straight actress friend of his who I'd known from St Andrews, Carol Boyd, who was Linda Snell in The Archers, and we did these benefits together. Carol just reads like an angel, and I sang songs. I think we did 3. I think we did. I did a gig for a gay club on the Isle of Dogs on New Year's Eve.
These were unpaid gigs, weren't they? At this point,
I've got a feeling that one, which I'd forgotten about. I think it's my 1977 diary says that the last entry is next year is the year of the Bunyan, but I'm still waiting for it.
it'll happen though. And there was an article that was written in Gay News.
Yeah, that was following one of these benefits at the Star in Croydon. He said, pointing towards Croydon, where Keith House from Gay News came up to me afterwards and asked if he could interview me about it and rate me very, very flattering.
What role did Gay News play in your career?
Well,
how significant?
It was very significant, because it was like being loved by the local newspaper, and there was this feeling, and Cap Gay in it, and almost they would, if I did a gig, they'd always sort of really push it. Because there was very, very little. There was Gay Switchboard and Sweatshop rather, and out of Sweatshop, particularly, the person in the London area was Alan Pope, who was in Mr. X, which I think Gay Switchboard did. Sweatshop did in, I think it was about 1977. I think it was 77 they did Mr. X, which was an absolutely wonderful piece, sort of based on with Downcast Gaze, the GLF manifesto book. And Alan did, certainly I remember seeing him doing a solo show, half of which was a drag act as Mary Whitehouse. And of course there were lots of drag performers, but they never said who they were. They might make occasionally serious comments, but they didn't. They weren't just saying, you know. I mean, I hope I never said I'm Mark Bunyan and I'm gay, but it was the fact that I'm gay would come out. And I mean, the first gig I did, where I sang "Is He One" as my opening number, and the last line of each chorus is "I'll tell you I'm one too," and I don't believe anybody had ever sung those words on a cabaret stage, and you know, as themselves.
What do you miss most about gay news, and what do you think of the gay press now?
As you get older, you realise things are of their time, and were there the need for them, they would still be there. Gay news was superseded by Capital Gay. Capital Gay ran for what, about another 10, 11, 12 years. And by that point, of course, I mean, there was the enormous scene. I remember Icebreakers ran the first regular disco. We ran a disco on Friday night at somewhere in the Caledonian Road. And it was to get funds for Icebreakers, and it was the first. Absolutely every week, you know, there would be a gay disco there, and Heaven opened. I remember the weekend I was invited to perform with two lesbian women, Andy and Hammarlund, in Sweden. We did a tour. Went to Oslo, Stockholm and Gothenburg. I was getting good reviews in Sweden. The Swedish straight press, lovely. The Diane's newsletter said lovely things about me when I performed in Sweden. And in fact, because of sort of government funding of things, I was actually invited to do a Sunday afternoon in the main concert hall in 1982. It was me in the afternoon and, oh God, I've forgotten her name. The incredibly famous Swedish soprano.
Well, it was an incredibly...
but it was her in the evening, yeah.
What inspires your comedy then?
An odd little thing. Dilly Keane, who's a great friend, put on my Facebook, if anybody says to me, you could write a song about that, I'm going to defriend them. And I must admit, most recent gig I did much the same thing. I said, you know, if somebody... If you write comic songs, to have people say, oh, you could write a song about this, you know, it brings out the man with the machete in me. But, you know, just occasionally something will happen. I had this experience in St Andrews, in fact, at a gig where I'd had a fair amount to drink, not a vast amount to drink. And I was in a B&B where I had the only room without an ensuite bathroom, and at 4 o'clock in the morning went out to the loo, realised I hadn't got the key to the bathroom, which was also the key to the bedroom, which is locked behind me, and I haven't worn pyjamas since 1972. And so I was locked out and could start naked in the B&B. And I just put that up as one line on Facebook, and during the day, sort of people kept saying, but what happened? And what happened then? And what happened then? And our niece in Virginia isn't on Facebook. So I sent her an email saying, look at Tim, her husband's, I want you to read the story. And she came back and said, and that will be a song, won't it? And I thought, oh yes, it will. And I have to say that particular song, I have a song about IKEA. The IKEA song, Billy, was actually inspired while we were sitting on 4 IKEA kitchen chairs that we had bought on a Saturday afternoon in IKEA, just as the tills all collapsed, crashed, and we had these chairs to sit down on. And everybody was looking with absolute hatred, and I thought, oh, Saturday at IKEA. And by the time we actually got through the tills, I think 2/3 of the song was written. With that one, I was never sure, initially I wasn't sure if people were going to get it. And the very first time I sang it at the Rotary Branch, I just remember this pair of eyes, and it was my great friend Rose Collis, in fact. I just saw these eyes light up, and I thought, oh yes, this is going to work.
Do you think humour has certain national characteristics? Because you've performed in Scandinavia.
Slapstick doesn't. I'm very, very, very much verbal comedy. And the use of words. I do work hard on my lyrics, and if somebody who knows their lyrics says that line's not very good, and I realise they're right, I feel I've let an awful lot of people down.
I asked you a question earlier and I didn't let you finish the answer. What do you think of the gay press now, just briefly?
I must admit, I have, most of it seems to be about the club scene, and so I don't feel the need for it, nor they of me, apparently.
You were a founding member of the Pink Singers.
Yeah, Brian Kennedy and Michael Mason, and I think possibly Andrew Lumsden as well. I mean, sort of, gay mafia people just kept saying to me, London needs a gay choir, and and it did look as though I was, at that point it really looked as though I was going to have a career, and I knew nothing about it. I'd never organised a choir, and eventually my arm was twisted so much that I said yes. And this always sounds sort of terribly grudging, and I cannot begin to tell you how proud I am of the fact that this is now the oldest LGBTQI choir in Europe.
Don't you know?
Don't you know? But I said I'll do it for 3 months, because I just didn't know that I would have the time, and it does take time. You've got the rehearsals, and also the choir master has got to be preparing for stuff, particularly if you don't have the vaguest idea what you're doing. The very first meeting we had, there were I remember the women. And you have to remember that the late 70s was a time of great separatism, and particularly a lot of women would be more difficult in public than they might be, and they were pointing. They were just sort of pointing out things that men never think about, and therefore we find it difficult when they do. But I have to say, the first meeting we had 4 women. I think there were 5 altogether. But there were 4 women who said that they wanted to sing tenor. They weren't going to be stereotyped into singing. And I had to persuade them that having listened to everybody else's voices, they were the only people with the equipment to sing these particular lines, which they sort of, I think, most of them graciously agreed to.
Were you also involved with Gaze the Word, the bookshop?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, Ernest was a great friend. Ernest and I joined Icebreakers on the same day. He was he lived about a quarter of a mile from us in Greenwich. We were great friends. I mean, really, sort of in the way you are in your 20s. You're in and out of one of those houses all the time, and he had this idea. And I think several Icebreakers people who had money, put money into it. I mean, we didn't have any money, but we were sort of very supportive of it, and sort of went. I mean, I can't remember exactly what we did. I think we sort of went along and helped sort things out and painted bits and stuff. And then Ernest asked me if I'd sing, because they had a piano then, which I don't think they do now, which had a copy of Ivor Novello's Gay's the Word proudly on it, and I did gigs. I probably need to look at my diaries, and it was pretty well every month. I did a gig, and they would get really fun and full, and I would introduce new staff. And interestingly, I had my song Madeleine, which I've just done at the Pheasantry, and it's still going well. But the first time I sang it, I just sang the song, and there was someone else there who sort of likes to give criticism, and said it didn't think the song worked, and blah 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 blah. And I felt, well, I'm going to try it again. And the next time I had two straight couple friends who'd come to the gig, and including Zoe and Frankie Armstrong, who later recorded Histories, and in fact she recorded Madeleine. You can get Madeleine recorded, sung by Frankie Armstrong. Absolutely lovely, very very French accompaniment to it. And I was feeling sort of rather silly, and I did this mock French introduction to it, and it completely took the song off. And there was a period I had 2 or 3 women or female groups wanted to sing it, and women could sing it, and the song just worked. Whereas if a man sings it, it had to have this introduction to make it work, which has always been an interesting thing.
You've performed at a variety of events. You've been at the Edinburgh Fringe, you've performed in New York, you've written lyrics and music as well as books and novels, and you've also done many solo shows, including the Pretty Policeman's Ball. And
well, that was a benefit. I mean,
that was a benefit, yes.
And I squeezed myself in, but I managed to squeeze myself in 2 years running.
But what's been your favourite gigs to perform? What types of gigs?
The last one. I mean, I just I remember the night in Edinburgh when I did I did three gigs in 1980, and it was the first time I'd had a gig the next night and a gig the next night, and God, you learn so much by doing it the next day and the next day. And 3 weeks in Edinburgh was fabulous that year. But I just remember there was this one guy who just sat absolutely stony faced all the way through, and I just remember thinking, oh well, you can't win them all. And he came up to me afterwards, and there was this one particular grim song that when I wrote it, Andrew said, "Can you rehearse it when I'm out of the house?" Which I hope is now not relevant, although you still hear horror stories. But they're basically it's verse chorus, and the verse is a policeman saying, "Mr. Smith, your son is dead." "Not my son. He was coming out of a gay disco. He's not your son. His partner was with him. He's not my son."
Denial.
Yeah, and that. And this guy came up afterwards and said, "Oh, the song about the policeman was great."
Talking of policemen, in 1992 you were appointed, surprisingly, a magistrate.
Yes, I'm not supposed to talk about it.
So we won't talk about it. But you are.
Yeah.
So we'll move swiftly on, unless you want to say something about that.
No, I mean it's something I'm proud of. I'm proud of the magistracy. It does keep updating itself.
But you must have applied for that.
Yes, and I had. I'm not going to name drop, but I had a woman friend who was a governor of prison, and I had an out gay MP was my other what do you call it, recommender.
And you clearly enjoy it.
I don't think anybody, at least I hope nobody enjoys.
But you stayed with
sentencing
it.
other people to anything. It's always fascinating, and at the magistrate's level, it is a question of finding the appropriate sentence, which you hope will stop somebody offending again.
1995, something a little bit more fun. You were canonised by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence.
Indulgence.
How did that come about, and what's your name?
I am St Mark of the Musical Tendency, or St Mark Lark for short. Yes, I was canonised. I was incredibly flattered. I think I was the last person that the sisters actually canonised. There were about 15 of us, and Derek Jarman had already died when I was canonised, and I had to, and he was the beatified. I can't remember the law, but
Beautified or something like that.
Yeah. No, the ceremony was absolutely fantastic. It was in Polari.
Oh, yes.
And Mother Molly came on, sort of, Bona to Voda, your eeks, and everybody had to reply, and to Vada, you Bona. It was fab, and I, it was really.
So do you get to dress up ever?
I did for that. I'm not really sort of into dressing up. I think possibly because gosh, here comes a psychological insight. I think because I dressed up for such a long time that I just want to be. What you see is what you get.
But you are.
I did. At St Andrews, I had a week where I was in drag twice. The only time I've ever done it. There was an all-male pageant through the town, and there were 2 women in it who would be played by men, and I'm absolutely ashamed of this now, because it was the founder of Queen's College Dundee, who was obviously an absolutely amazing woman, but on the other hand, it was the most fantastic Charlie's Aunt costume with a cloche hat and stuff, and I'm very proud of the fact that even though I wasn't remotely out and was terrified that I might be suspected of being gay, the person who played Mary Queen of Scots said, who was the provost of the town, said, to whom I think I raised my skirt to the principal and showed him my leg, and then I blew a kiss to the provost, and he said, "Who was the chap playing Mary Ann Baxter of Balgivers? Some of the council were very worried about him."
Love it.
So, a week later, John Cleese was made rector at St Andrews, and they wanted 1 student to be in it, and I was the Spanish lady in the Ministry of Silly Walks, and I played the piano, and I was more nervous than I've ever been doing anything ever again.
You clearly are versatile, because in 2010 you became a trampolinist. How did that come about?
Oh, and I started trampolining in about 1993. I was going to the Y, the Central London Y, and it's sort of various circles of hell, and I was on one sort of bit higher, and on an exercycle, reading the Iliad. I think I thought it was time to read the Iliad, and a silly lad, I looked down and I saw all these people bouncing, and I thought, well, gosh, I'd love to do that. And I thought, well, you're paying for it. And we went off on holiday, and I determined that when I got back, I would take up trampolining and I'd learn Catalan, but I never did learn Catalan. I gave up after about 3 lessons. But trampolining, I just stuck to resolutely through all these incredibly patient trampolining teachers.
You're a medalist, aren't you?
In 2009, a friend went to the British Gymnastics vets and said, nobody does it, but there's this, fun competition to do. And I went the next year and I got a silver medal, and with 3 people in the class, and I've won the gold medal twice, and I won't tell you how many people were there.
Couple more questions.
But there's absolutely nothing to prove that if anybody had turned up, I wouldn't have won a medal.
Post-gay liberation.
I want to talk about, because this is, doesn't get to Just Good Friends, which was a youth musical that I wrote in 1982. I wrote it for the cockpit which was an ILEA-funded theatre at that time. They had a lot of summer projects and holiday projects, and they would do a big musical in the summer. And Alistair Cameron, who was an absolute darling man who died of AIDS, I think in the late 80s, had me in because he'd seen me in Edinburgh, and they were looking to commission a piece, but for the following summer, for the summer of 1981, but they decided they were having a competition for the summer. No, sorry, I beg your pardon, 1982, and I had 2 months to write Just Good Friends, which was about the story of the friendship between a gay man and a straight woman of 50 years. And it was done with a cast of 49. It had what I can only call rave reviews from the Morning Star through to the Sunday Telegraph. The cockpit seats 120 people. On the last night, there was a queue for returns at 5:30 started, and there were 150 people in the theatre sitting in the aisles. I watched from the flyers. There were points. The gay sweatshop had done stuff, but it was very much sort of fringe theatre. I mean, there were a lot of people who weren't so keen on Just Good Friends because it was the story of a man living under his own oppression. But he did get to make a big coming out speech at the end, which I felt was important. I mean, and it wouldn't have. I mean, I just think 2,000 people saw that over that 2.5 weeks. He also had a song where he sang. He had the 11 o'clock number, and he sang about all the men over his life. I don't think anybody had ever done anything like that before. And on the recording that I have of last night, you can actually hear people sobbing. And I didn't see the first 3 days because I was performing in Edinburgh. I came down on the Monday. The first night was absolutely amazing. The cast were just wonderful. I'm still friends with a lot of them. Somebody just sent me an email from Grenada saying I was in Just Good Friends. I don't know if you remember me, which I do. And at the end of the night, a man came up and said, "You wrote it, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, my friend and I can't believe that they could have stayed friends all that time without carnal knowledge. And this is, the friendship between a gay man and a straight woman. And all I could say was, well, I think they can. I certainly know they can. I mean, I've got an awful lot of very close women friends, and men friends, but women friends in my life. The next night, I was in the loo at the interval, and I suddenly realised that the man standing at the next urinal was this same man. I said, "Weren't you here last night?" And he said, "We missed the beginning." So we thought we'd come and see it again. He came up to me afterwards. I've never seen anybody crying so much. He just absolutely loved it. I put his life on stage. He'd obviously been to see musical theatre for years. And suddenly there was a piece that I felt that this man, and I'm just astoundingly proud of that.
Post-gay liberation, everybody's coming out of the closet. Is satire harder to write?
Well, the thing is, I wrote a series of monologues called Down in the Village, and they are, one of them is available on the CD that I flog at gigs, recorded in front of a large audience at the Donmar Warehouse. And the first one was about how appallingly sexist pantomime is, but at the same time, you don't change people's hearts and minds by screaming at them, you're being sexist. And this is, somebody stands up in the village panto. And the my character, the narrator character, is the one who's written the songs, and he doesn't understand why they're sexy. Why do you think? I mean, and the word "sexist" in 1980 wasn't, it wasn't there. So he thinks of saying it's how you could say it was sexy when I wrote it, knowing there would be kiddies going to be listening to it. And my friend Carol Boyd, who is now in the Archers, and has been for many years, she said these characters are absolutely wonderful. She said you should write something you can do the rest of the year. So I wrote a monologue. It was, I think I was sort of, I used to do gigs for sort of Pride Festival, and I was booked, I think, for 3 days at the Oval, and I'd got this monologue, which was about stereotyping, and it was they're always doing a musical, so it gives me a chance to do lots of parodies of musical styles. And they were doing a 20s operetta. And Michael Biggleswick from the Polytechnic, very arty, he'd read this biography of Sigmund Pommel, and it said that he was probably, and so he'd sort of changed the whole thing so that everybody's cross-dressing and flouncing around and stuff, and the musician gets really, really angry, and he says, why do we never see any normal people like Brian or Sally or me, and what are you going to do about it? What will Michael Biggleswick do about it? And what has he been doing with Mrs. Jones? Stay tuned for the next exciting instalment. And just I got the monologue, but I didn't know how to go in and out, so I wrote this barky sort of theme. And are now down in the village and every story of rural life. And I put this at the beginning and the end, and I thought that's the end of it. And people came up afterwards and said, well, but what did happen? What did happen? So 2 years later, I think there was all the stuff about the place outside Cheltenham, GCHQ, and this ludicrous Gilbert and Sullivan paradox of, you mustn't tell people you're gay because then they'll say you're liable to be blackmailed. So you keep it quiet, which means you're liable to be blackmailed, and it just goes on. And that was the end. Well, Charlie isn't a problem. What is he going to do about it? There was one about that. We lived in a trio, and we were sort of perfectly happy talking about it. And everybody else in the village has got a mistress or whatever, but they don't talk about it. And there was that. I had an embarrassing experience with a friend's children taking apart a tampon, and at the age of 32 I'd never seen one. I said, what's that they've got? And her mother went to the cover of These Walls and said, don't you know what it is? And so I wrote an episode about tampons, which actually that went down very well. It's a big benefit at the Playhouse.
Mark, do you think you've been given the recognition that you deserve?
That's an awkward question. Probably not. One of the peculiar things is you talk to younger people, and in many ways the recognition is the fact that what I did isn't remotely special now. And I can honestly say I didn't do it for the recognition. I always thought my stuff was so good that I would have a successful career. I don't necessarily want to be famous. I've seen that. But I'd like to have made more money than I have. I for the work that I've done, and also, my career sort of never took off when I was at an age for it to happen in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, because the film about me, Rose Colley says that people said, oh, he was too gay. It wasn't that I was too gay, it was the fact that I was gay, that I was just, you couldn't talk about it. We, you know, even on late, you know, the 12 till 2, radio producers were terrified. You know, there is an old lady in Lewis who will ring in and complain because there's a homosexual on. I mean, I did start the week, Christmas 1980, and I have a quite good version of the producer start the week had me on writing a song about Edinburgh in 1980, the first time I went up. I can't remember where I'd met him, and we became great friends. But I mean, he was, as far as I know, he was straight. So he was sort of married, and there was never anything, you know, I didn't think there was ever anything unspoken there. But he was producing at the start of the week, and I had a version of the 12 Days of Christmas, which it just does puns on the numbers. It's on the first day of Christmas, my true love sent to me a partridge in a pear tree. So on the second day of Christmas, the idea came to me to rid myself of both partridge, and it goes punning on the numbers all the way through. And they had that on start of the week on Radio 4. And I think by that time I'd also done, because the Telegraph had named me as best individual performer on the Fringe without using the G word. In the previous September, I'd done midweek then, and they asked me to write a song, and you know it was just a song. It was because there were sort of various big openings that week. I did a very ordinary song about theatre, but the true love in was I always sang he through that. The country didn't fall apart. There was only one letter which said, it was from a mother and daughter who said how much they love Richard Baker, who introduced the programme, and could we have the lyrics of that really funny version of the 12 Days of Christmas. So, you know, I mean, I was singing about my true love as a he there.
You mentioned start the week. Do you find a difference between writing for radio and writing for a live audience?
No.
No.
I mean, I've written very little on commission anyway, and when I do, it's just I did a song which I loved. In fact, I had this idea for a song. I was commissioned to write some songs for a program on childhood, and I had a story, and I wrote, and it was commissioned on Saturday, got to be recorded on Friday, and you know, I mean, there are people who can do that, but I'd never had to do it before, and so I sat on Monday. I sat down and I got the tune, and on a Tuesday I sat down and I had this story, and it was a story about childhood that I wanted to tell about how childhood. I think one of the things about growing up is disappointment, realising you have to live with disappointment, realising that nobody is going to be able to make a magic wand to make the friend who was on holiday with you last year come this year because her parents have gone somewhere else. Based on it was, you know, I had a close friend that I used to meet on holiday every year, and I just remember thinking, oh, if Joe didn't come, you know, it would have been. And that would have been, I mean, I think it's a really important thing, unfortunately, in childhood, is those things. And by the end of the day, I got 2 lines. I mean, it was a story that just nothing rhymed. And so I wrote something else in desperation to this tune, and I sang it and threw it away. And it was, in fact, it was Michael, because I didn't have that much material for gigs, I sort of put it in just as a filler, and Michael Mason, who was the news editor of Gay News, who was a friend, he came to a gig and he said, "Oh, you didn't do A for Apple," and I thought, oh, somebody actually loves this song, and I'm still doing it. It fits into a programme well. I didn't do it last time, but.
Do you find a difference between comedy, humour and wit?
It's something about shape, isn't it? It's wit can overlie comedy, but it's empty without comedy behind it. Does that make any sense, or just sound like?
How would you describe them? What you do?
Um,
Or is it a mix of all the three? Or
well, I know I'm witty because I've been described so in national newspapers. I'm not terribly sure I've been described as funny.
I think you're funny.
Yes.
You are in your 60s, without giving your age, well, I pretty much did. So you are in your 60s.
I'm 66. I'm proud of it.
And proud of it, as you should be.
I find it so odd as well. The guy up the road, lovely man who runs the Indian corner shop, because I'm limping at the moment because of trampolining injury, and I said, this is an age thing. You know, this knee has finally said enough of this already.
Less bouncing.
Yeah, but I'm hoping arthroscopy soon, and I'll be back to it. It was, I think it was my 65th birthday. People kept saying, you know, how does it feel? Do you do it? And I said, I don't know. I've never been 65 before. People ask that question, and I think how sad you must be to have those expectations in your head to be asking me that question.
But do you find it in an age where we're very youth-oriented? You know, people who are performing tend to be quite young. They're the ones that often get promoted.
When I was young, I was very youthful.
But now, do you find it hard to remain relevant or popular because of that? Because you're getting older?
An interesting thing is the realisation that, and I've got young trampolining friends in their 20s, and I will run new material by them, not necessarily telling them that that's what I'm doing. The IKEA song had a line behind Chloe and Joe, who both have BO. Now, ask anybody over 35, and that has a meaning. To people in their 20s, you know, body odour was a concept dreamed up by Lifebuoy in the 1950s, and it seems to have sort of faded away. I don't know, perhaps I have to say I can't remember the last time I actually smelt someone with, you know, that particular rank.
But you find it easy to sort of stay with the times? Or get
I'll tell you, at my it was my 65th birthday, we had a huge party that started at 12, and I saw the last young trampoliners walk up the road with a few older people as well, at 25 to 1, and about 10 o'clock, I think at my 60th birthday party, people asked me to sing in the afternoon, and I thought, well, okay, do it and get it over with. At the 65th, my birthday is in September, so we've got 2 big rooms and a garden, and there were, you know, just lots and lots of people that I just love, full. And at about 10 o'clock, most people had left, and the trampoliners asked me to sing. And they were saying, oh, sing the art song, sing, the one I remember was the art song. But I suddenly realised that the people in their 20s are actually asking me to sing a song that they think is funny and has that relevance to them. I think it's more a question of the kind of person you are if you like this kind of thing. I know there are people and friends that I can sing a song and they just sort of stare at me sort of with this look of, a lot of other people like this, don't they?
You've also written a couple of novels. We did touch upon them earlier, but are they serious novels or are they comedic?
They're both comedic. Yesterday's Blonde was the first. There are so many things that I did before anybody else did, and then somebody else comes along and gets the credit for them. It was, as far as I know, it was the first novelisation of the rest of Marilyn Monroe's life. So it starts on the morning of the 5th of July 1962, and over the next 18 months she completely changes the course of American history. It was published by Paul Haggerty, who was running the Gaze the Way bookshop. He was starting an imprint. I just had it turned down by umpteen people. I had a literary agent, and they turned me down. They sent everything I'd ever written back in one box, and that's some rejection, I can tell you. But I found a production. Well, in fact, I won a competition. I found a production with the play that they'd not managed to sell for 2 years, and a publisher for the book. So,
because of course you've written a play, haven't you? You've written more than one play.
I've had one play produced quite a long while ago. Again, which it won the Croydon the Warehouse Theatre Croydon's International Playwriting Competition, 1989.
Two more
and it was very successful, but it sort of got the wrong reviews.
2 more questions. What advice do you have for people starting out in the comedy, particularly musical comedy business?
None whatsoever.
What are your hopes for the future then?
That somebody put me on somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I adore what I do. I love being on stage, and people seem to enjoy me being there when they come.
Mark Bunyan, thank you very much.
Thank you.